but we do have a quorum.
Great turnout.
So seeing that we do have a quorum at this particular time, I'd like to call the Law and Government Committee to order at 8:33. Can I have a roll call, Kath, please?
Sauger.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Hendricks. Campbell. Kunkel. Shorten.
Here.
Altough.
Here. I think we're going to be a little short today. I don't believe that either Member Campbell or Member Kunkel will be joining us. I'm hopeful that Member Hendricks will show up after he checks in at court. But even so, the four of us can conduct business as there's a quorum. Minute approval. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
There was just a Scribner's error.
Okay, so motion, second by Shorten. Discussion. Ms. Wagner.
So it's very minor. It's but I just want to make sure it's correct. So in the portion, hold on, I gotta find it here. Deadlines and procedural items. So it was underneath the legislative update. It just said that the Senate takes 71 votes for the majority and the House 36. It's just switched.
Can we, with that change, agreed?
Yes.
Can we have a roll call then, please?
Sauger.
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes.
Shorten.
Yes.
Altough.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator DeWitt, is there any public comment there on that little list next to you to your right?
I see no one listed, Madam
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you very much, sir.
I could put my name on there
Welcome
if
to
you
the
like.
committee. As there's no public comment, moving on, any member comments this morning? None. Excellent. Routine consent agenda. Does anyone have anything that they would like to remove from the consent agenda? Any questions? Excellent. I was waiting for that. Can I have a motion then to approve the consent agenda? Sauger, Shorten, seconds. May I have a roll call?
Wagner.
Yes.
Sauger.
Yes.
Shorten.
Yes.
Altough.
Yes. We have the pleasure this morning of having invited our senators that represent McHenry County to come talk a little bit about their agendas, what is going on during veto, what their specific agenda is going forward into the 2024 session. And we also would like to talk a little bit about what our agenda is in general. So I'm going to invite Alicia as well as her colleague Shaylin, who does McCog and is our coordinator for shared services. I'm having trouble this morning. To kind of talk about what we've discussed with regard to important items, specifically those things that we were presented by our constitutional officers and staff members as concerns that they have moving forward. I know that we ourselves are still working on coming up with an agenda to send to the county board, but we can have a conversation on some of the items that we've discussed. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Alicia, and then Senator DeWitt. Hopefully Senator McConkie will be joining us in between then, and Senator Wilcox. Thank you so much for taking the time to actually being here this morning with us and kind of giving us an update and then talking about what your agenda is for the coming session. So Alicia, you're on.
Thank you, Chairman. Senators, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm Alicia Schuler, Communications and Project Manager, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about our legislative program. So, while we haven't had any formal votes yet on the legislative program, some of the initiatives that have come to the surface by our constitutional officers is one in particular by our county sheriff right here. And of course, he has all the details on this one, but our police social work program has been taking off and doing incredibly well and making great inroads in our community. But one of the things that we really like is to be included in the co-responders pilot program. And that is really important for our county. I mean, it's a groundbreaking program and it should be, and our sheriff's office should be included in there. I understand that you guys are both very supportive of this legislation, and I hope that, going forward, we can, bring this forward in the upcoming sessions.
Actually, Rob, help me out if I'm incorrect. The program had $10 million that was allocated in the budget, but there's still a remaining $400,000 that hadn't been dispersed or hadn't been allocated to anything. And I think what we're asking is to take that $400,000 and allocate it to McHenry County. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
So specifically that, I think that's an easier request than just saying we want money. We just want what's available. Seeing as how, again, our program basically was the template that all the other entities are using to establish their own. I think somehow we should get a little bit of credit for that, for the initiative. So, thank you.
Thank you. Another initiative that is being brought forward by our Division of Transportation is reform for the funding of local roads, especially in regards to electric vehicles. Right now, local roads aren't being funded by electric vehicle users. Yes, the states are receiving money through registrations for the electric vehicles, but the local governments are not. So any reform that you guys could put forward would be very appreciative to try to make sure that everybody is paying their fair share of local roads. All right, and those are the two big ones that that are at the state level right now.
Right. Anything you have to add to that? And obviously, it's still the same unfunded mandates. We know like those. There's no desire.
Exactly. Okay, so those are the two initiatives that are new.
And we thank you for your assistance with our last year's quick take. So thank you very much for helping guide that through. Do you want to talk a little bit too, just so that they're aware of Representative Ness's legislation?
Yes, of course, of course. Representative Ness has put through a bill called House Bill 4190, and it makes it so that the Paid Leave Workers for All Act is postponed from its effective date of January 1 of 2024 to July 1 of 2024. Now, there are other pieces of the legislation that are out there that I suspect the committee would be very much in support of, one of which is Representative Sosnowski's bill, which I believe is 4291.
Right.
Let me look that one up.
Yes.
It is, okay. And that one would remove counties and local governments from the Paid Leave Workers for All Act. Again, we understand that there's many issues with this legislation, but it needs to be reformed, and we're hoping that you both would be willing to help us reform that legislation.
Anybody else have any comments? No? Then what I'll do is ask Senator DeWitt to kind of, and along with Senator Wilcox, to kind of give us an update of what's going on in Vito and what you see happening next week. And then if you could also go into your own agendas or any initiatives that you think you need our support on.
Go ahead. Thank you.
I didn't know alphabetically, seniority,
okay.
sit closest
Well,
to the
he
door.
wins on both. But it's home turf for Senator Wilcox.
Understand.
So, but thank you. The Paid Leave Act has been getting a lot of attention since its passage last year. Appreciate Representative Ness's bill. Sosnowski's bill I was aware of. I took the liberty of approaching the bill sponsor directly, Senator Rob Martwick, and have discussed with him, rather than new pieces of legislation, he's agreed to consider an amendment to the existing bill, which might be an easier route to take legislatively, to eliminate municipalities, townships, and counties from the Paid Leave Act. Clearly, it's a financial burden that everybody's going to have to deal with. I have done my best to notify municipalities particularly that there was opt-out language in the bill itself, that any government entity that already had paid leave within its statutory authority was exempted from the law that goes into effect January 1st, 2024. For some reason, a lot of municipalities particularly have been skeptical that will actually get them out of it. But, and I'll use my home community as an example, St. Charles, they already allow paid leave within their employee manual. And they also have paid leave within all of their collective bargaining agreements, of which they have 6. So I think they're going to pursue the avenue of simply putting those into local statute. And according to the language in the bill, it will then exempt them from the January 1st requirement of 40 hours of paid leave per employee. So I'm going to pursue the route with the bill sponsor, Senator Martwick. I think that might be the best way to incorporate this fix as quickly as possible, an amendment rather than new legislation that would need to clear both houses. As far as the mental health co-responder legislation, Carolyn Schofield has done a very nice job helping me put together a letter that we will be finalizing this week to the Speaker and to President Harmon, requesting that $400,000 that's left in the $10 million appropriation for that program. It's really unfortunate the Speaker came all the way out here to see this program and then basically negated you guys in the process. I think that was an unfortunate snub, for lack of a better description. And maybe we'll find out why that happened someday.
I'm gonna stick with oversight.
Could be, yeah. That's certainly what they'll use as an excuse, I'm sure. So we'll certainly work with Senator Wilcox to make sure that letter gets out to the Speaker and President, try to collect what's left in the fund. And then as far as the electric vehicle requirements, local road component, I will respectfully remind everybody in the room that the motor fuel tax doubled 2 years ago with the passage of the increase in the motor fuel tax with annual escalators included. There has been some discussion on the transportation side in Springfield about continuing to adjust the revenue stream as more and more electric vehicles come into the system. I don't think they're coming in nearly as quickly as some people would have hoped they would, but they are starting to become a larger portion of the vehicles using the roads. So we'll continue to dig into that subject. Senator Villavelom, Chairman of Transportation, has put together what he calls a blue ribbon commission that has started the process of reviewing those revenue streams. Right now, the only specific revenue stream going to electric vehicles has been the registration fee that tries to make up for the lack of motor fuel tax that obviously those vehicles are not participating in. So that's an ongoing discussion, and we'll continue to keep local governments in mind as those conversations move forward. Veto session last week, most of it I can probably leave up to Senator Wilcox because frankly there wasn't much that went on. The Paid Leave Act has been something I've been working on. Elimination of the grocery tax is some legislation that I was hoping to hopefully get moved in veto session. It's not going to happen. We'll probably have to move it to spring. Some of you may recall a year and a half ago the governor suspended the grocery tax along with pharmaceuticals, medical supplies. I guess at this point we can only classify those suspensions as election year proposals that mysteriously disappeared a couple of months after the election. I introduced last spring permanent elimination of the grocery tax. I actually got a call from the governor over the summer who thought it was a really good idea, but we needed to figure out how to backfill local governments who are the recipients of that 1% sales tax. I suggested to the governor that we simply give local governments more of the LGDF money that the state is already sweeping on an annual basis. He described that as a quote, interesting theory, unquote. So,
It's actually very nice.
and I have prepared amendment language to include that backfill process into this piece of legislation. I'm waiting for a blessing from either the governor's office or Senate Dems to see if that's something they're going to live with. I'm not going to spin my wheels, and you know the deal. We're not going to do a lot of legwork if it's not going to happen. So.
Exactly, but can I ask you how much money that would?
Statewide, it's $200 to $300 million on an annual basis. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money. On a $100 grocery bill, it's going to be $1. But you know, if you're spending $100 or $200 or $300 a week feeding your family, it starts to add up fairly quickly. And I kind of take the theory that my mother used to teach me, that you have to save money the same way you spend it, in little pieces at one at a time. And so I think it is certainly worth doing. you know, let the governor prove me wrong that it was nothing more than an election gimmick when he simply suspended it for 6 months, year and a half ago. I think it makes sense. I've got a number of co-sponsors on the legislation already. The amendment fixes the problem. I don't know why they wouldn't approve it, but they may not, so.
Could you do something that would also include a sunset on that so you can evaluate how it affects the overall budget? The laws?
Yeah, we kind of have a pretty good handle based on the governor's suspension from a year and a half ago, how much money it
Yeah.
affects. We have that information. I'm not interested in a sunset, we just need to eliminate it. We believe cost of living issues will remain probably the #1 issue for candidates this coming cycle. Gasoline prices, grocery pricing. I heard on the drive up today, for the second year in a row, Halloween candy is up double digit.
13%, I know, I did the same thing, yeah. Sugar.
Yeah, exactly. So cost of living continues to be a major problem, not only here in Illinois, but across the nation. And I think we need to do everything we can to chip away a piece at a time. You know, eat the elephant one bite at a time, if you will. We need to chip away at saving folks, taking some pressure off grocery bills in particular. The healthcare expense for undocumented immigrants coming into this country continue to be a major problem. Some of you may recall there was an estimated $1.1 billion expenditure anticipated this year based on influx into Illinois. The governor cut that number in half to $550 million and then proceeded to eliminate several of the measures he said he was going to implement to try to cut costs. The one that got the most attention, should I hold?
No.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
The one that cost a lot of people, that caught a lot of people's attention was the implementation of copays, which 30 days after it was announced, they were eliminated because they couldn't figure out how to administer them. Again, another example of government at its finest. So we're keeping an eye on that. The other issue that our caucus is particularly interested in is a number of questions that we have asked regarding the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been invested with no input from our side of the aisle that the governor has negotiated with a company down in Manteno called Goshen, Inc. He's committed nearly $600 million in financial incentives with a company that has direct ties to the Chinese government. Our caucus sent what I believe to be a very considerate, thoughtful letter asking very considerate questions about how much investigation has been done about this company. Have you conferred with federal officials regarding their operations, their connections with the Chinese government? And we got basically a temper tantrum and got called a lot of names by the governor's office, which was really unfortunate. He's spending our money with virtually no input or oversight by Republicans. We are purposely excluded from that whole business incentive fund process. It's very unfortunate. My fear is we're going to see the same thing here in Belvedere very shortly with Stellantis.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of press about, you know, this new UAW contract, which is going to cost, I think there were 25% increase in compensation that I've heard that has miraculously recharged Stellantis going back into business in Belvedere. I think the governor's going to probably try to take credit for that. I can't wait to see how he explains that. But they're spending a lot of state taxpayers' money without a lot of oversight, and that has many of us concerned. So that's just a broad overview of what I'm working on, what we'll continue to work on, and I'll turn it over to Senator Wilcox, so I'm sure can supplement.
Thank you, Senator DeWitt. Certainly supportive of the co-responders program inclusion, so we'll be working with that. On the McDOT road share program, you mentioned, you know, the gas tax was doubled. I think that in one sense misses the issue as to about who's paying, right? So yes, it provided significant road issue or road funds But again, that is those that are paying for gas. So I do agree that this is becoming a growing problem, certainly with all of the government push, and there needs to be a consideration. I don't know as though I am supportive of moving, which some people have talked about, moving away from a gas tax and going to a mileage or per mileage tax. To me, if it was self-reported, maybe possible, but if it's a plug-in government watch, that certainly raises additional questions for me. Unfunded mandates, it's going to continue to come. All we can do is have that discussion. On the Paid Leave Act, I don't know how many of you saw my response. McCog had requested, I've had some municipalities request. What I asked was, yes, there are significant problems with this bill. Not necessarily in the mandate for the paid time off, but in all of the benefits or limited restrictions that it gives to employees that put employers in a rough spot. Limited time notice, no scheduling. So the concern, and I think one of the statements in the request was that it could put, residents at risk. And I think the explanation was if an entire shift of firemen or entire shift of police decided to take the same day off. My view is that's no different for your private industry, right? There are plenty of businesses in this area that if an entire shift gave no notice and took the day off, that citizens would be at risk given the equipment and the chemicals in some of our plants. So my request is that we band together and actually ask for the bill to reconsider some of those aspects. So I probably will oppose an amendment that exempts government from the same issues that we've put on private employers.
And we appreciate that explanation very much. Thank you.
From the Stellantis plant in Belvedere, that's the route I take to Springfield. It's interesting that the entire land across the street from the plant has already been cleared, earth movers and everything, so it has absolutely nothing to do with a UAW contract. If something gets announced out there, just know that for months that has been in the plans. I don't know exactly what is going in there, but it is certainly something that predates even the strikes. A couple bills. Certainly given the Woodstock gas explosion, there's a fuel gas detector bill that I filed last February. It's been asked for a subject matter hearing so that we can actually figure out what the government might like to do. If you read just the bill the way it's filed, I will acknowledge it is much more of a government mandate than I will ever probably move forward under my name. But it is what was requested, and having a subject matter hearing will allow us to have some of those discussions. So if we talk about Woodstock, one of the questions that we got through Facebook, would a gas detector in that house have prevented the explosion given that the cut was out at the roadway and everything? And my response is possibly, right? If there had been an alarm in that house with rising levels and was being monitored, obviously the homeowners were not home. If it was a monitored alarm, first responders would have known that the gas was increasing in that house and maybe taken action. So there is that possibility. The reality why I'm carrying this bill with a military background and being a combat comm guy where we would often dig in countries where maybe permits and identification of what's underground was never there, hitting a gas line, having civil engineers doing a road, hitting our comm lines, having that knowledge was always a concern. So having standard operating procedures, having some type of prevention capability, and having a monitoring structure is always part of a strong safety plan. We do fire alarms, we do smoke alarms, we do carbon monoxide alarms, we do radon testing, we require it during home inspections. There was a time when most home inspectors had gas sniffers with them, and they would go around and look for gas leaks when a house was being sold. Due to liability concerns, it became uncost productive for them to cover insurance if they were ever to miss something and something happened later on. So we're going to look to work with the realtors to see if there's something that can be done on that front. Illinois is not exactly open arms when it comes to removing liability as seen by my farm bill that would have created limited liability for agritourism. So that's going to be a challenge. But the reality, I think Illinois and many other states need to do something in regards to natural gas, propane. The fuel detector alarms are getting very advanced. Con Edison in New York saw that the PR problem was probably cost prohibitive if they didn't do something. They are in a multi-year plan of purchasing detectors and having them installed in their customers' residences and businesses. So what will this bill actually look like? I would foresee hopefully some type of an education program on why it's important. If you have at least one fuel leak detector at the input to your house, ideally you would have one in every room with a gas appliance. These gases are heavier and rise to the ceiling, so this is another monitor that would go up on the ceiling as opposed to radon where you're watching down in the basement. Would we ideally convincing the public utilities that this would be in their best interest and having it come from them with their agreement would be ideal. I'm hesitant to do what the bill currently says is a mandate that one must be in every fuel detector with a fine if you don't have it. I probably would not carry the bill if that language remains in. But it's a discussion that we need to have, especially with where things have gone. And we actually, in the legislature, had a bill a year and a half ago allowing more natural gas down into rural farming areas. And this actually almost came up on the table during that bill of whether it would require detectors to be put in for those new natural gas lines. So it's definitely a discussion. Other issues, Rep. Reich, Rep. Weber, and myself were all on the DCFS task force for the past 2 years that was legislator run, which meant it didn't require governor's staff, it didn't require DCFS to be involved. We did bring them in at different times, but the goal was to hear from former DCFS employees and leadership and agencies that worked with DCFS, trying to understand what really needs to change there. Was disappointed to learn that the director was given the opportunity to submit a resignation letter not effective until the end of December as opposed to being fired. But changing that director does not change the culture. And when you get down into the worker level, the culture of families first is completely misunderstood if you listen to what leadership says it was intended to do versus how it gets looked at down at the office. At the worker level, the presumption that it only takes very strong exceptions to break a family apart is the way it's been implemented a lot, which certainly was a case leading to AJ's situation. Rep. Reich has a bill that would deconstruct DCFS in one manner here in McHenry County as a pilot program and give additional local oversight, whether that's at the state's attorney's office or through the sheriff's. Right now, a centralized organization where the headquarters are Springfield and Chicago and all of your agencies are spread out seems to be untenable in getting a culture change that is required. So we'll continue to be pressing that.
And you remember unfunded mandates. We love doing that and love having that locally, but we don't want to take it on if it costs us additional money. We've had conversations with
Even if it's the right thing to do?
That. It's money, baby.
Understood. And then the only other comment I wrote on the sunsets, I'm almost at the point where I'm looking to vote against every sunset extension because the sunset extensions don't come with an actual review of why the sunset was put in. So it seems to be a way of claiming something as a short-term program when the acknowledgement is there's an omnibus bill that just extends every sunset that's coming due. So if we could actually get to sunsets where a review is done, which actually requires understanding what metrics you want to look at in the course of the time going forward, that's what it would take for me to kind of agree to future sunsets.
I find that unusual with the fact that they've passed massive legislation with regard to budgeting for results, and they have metrics. It wouldn't be, I concur with you, it wouldn't be that hard for them to provide you with that information before just extending it. Yeah, really. I apologize. Senator DeWitt?
Just to circle back, I certainly appreciate Senator Wilcox's position on an amendment that gives private businesses more of a burden than government. I just want to clear that the emphasis for my amendment to eliminate municipalities, counties, and townships is purely driven by the public safety component. 3 guys on an engine decide to catch the Cubs game on a Wednesday afternoon, without any notification to their supervisors, certainly can create some serious public safety issues. And
No doubt.
that issue's driving my amendment, but I certainly understand your position on the public-private sharing.
But if the Blues or Blackhawks ever get in a very critical playoff game, much of the state will shut down. It's no
Anyway.
different. Cubs, White Sox, and World Series, we're gonna have lots of that short-term time off.
And honestly, just as a chair position here, absolutely understand that there's gonna be a vast difference of opinion and positioning. It just helps us when we go out into the public to be able to know so that we are stating your positions clearly and it doesn't look like they're absolutely controversial or that they don't make sense. So I appreciate the fact that, you shared that with us. That's a purpose.
And the other thing I wanted to share, I did go back and pull the language in the current Paid Leave Act statute. This is a very brief paragraph. The provisions of this act shall not apply to any employer that is covered by a municipal or county ordinance that is in effect on the effective date of this act, which is January 1st, 2024, that requires employers to give any form of paid leave to their employees, including paid sick leave or paid leave. So counties are included in that exemption, and
Hey, Pam.
Pete had a comment.
Pete?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate that, and so the committee's aware, I have asked the State Attorney's Office to look at that and prepare that language, in the event that the legislation isn't changed, they're doing that part of it. We didn't quite read it the way that you read it, it sort of felt like we were being asked to draft an ordinance for all employers.
Yes.
And that's a much bigger step. And so we were inferring that it was somehow we were saying for all McHenry County employers, that would be but if it is limited to us as the employer, that's easy enough to do. But that,
I read it the way you read it,
Right.
that if the county chose to say any employer in McHenry County is going to be required to give XX, and
Right.
that's the way I initially read it.
so I think the state's attorney's working on that, and we'll have that for December in the event that the legislation doesn't change. And we'll probably craft it such that we're only saying for the county as an employer. Clearly, the legislation was not intended for employers like McHenry County. We provide all the leave time. We provide more leave time than the legislation even suggested. And again, the other example, we've referenced firefighters and police, it's our nursing home as well. If everybody, all the nurses decide to go to that Blackhawks game, we have a problem there as well.
Shaylin?
Same with municipalities. I think that they're all talking to their city and village attorneys, and they're hearing different things. And so Peter and I had a city managers meeting a couple weeks ago, and even within the room, they were hearing different things from their city attorneys. So that's helpful.
And I've gotten that feedback, Shaylin, so along with public safety issues, the feedback from municipalities and counties is the other reason for the amendment, so.
I'm assuming also too that they're talking to Senator Martwick and expressing some of the same confusion or at least differing of opinions,
I
no?
asked Senator Martwick that question on the floor last week, and he did not, he's in Chicago, which is already exempted. So
Oh, so.
he represented to me, he has not heard a lot of feedback from municipalities outside of the city. So.
But IML was down there this
Right.
past week talking this issue, so.
And this is IML's language that I have submitted as part of this amendment request. So.
Good to know. Anybody have any questions for either one of our senators? Mr. Sagar?
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it so much. Good to hear with regards to your comments and your efforts. And we do appreciate your efforts, so thank you. I was wondering if you could give us some insight in terms of where you think the moratorium on nuclear power plants is and where that might be going.
Take a shot.
Sure. I know Senator Rezin has another bill that I think the concern was in, again, the reading of the language, different views. I don't believe Senator Rezin's intent was to say, let's start actively seeking another massive nuclear plant like Byron being built. It was geared towards some of the potential new technology that would possibly provide, whether it's molten salt reactor or whatever, a smaller scale nuclear development that possibly powers a major municipality or something like that. So the governor's veto alluded to a vagueness in that. So there should be another bill. However, I don't know that the environmental groups on one side are in agreement. So whether the numbers are there or even the interest in calling it next week, I don't believe is likely going to come up. So most likely that bill and its veto will probably stand and will be readdressed next year, is my take.
The analogy I make when it comes to this newer, smaller reactor type technology is the analogy of what are being used currently on submarines or destroyers or aircraft carriers that are all nuclear powered. Smaller nuclear reactors. That technology has now started expanding. I think I read just the other day in Idaho, there's some smaller municipal-oriented reactors in the development process. There's still a lot of kinks to work out, obviously, but the goal of her bill, I think, was for smaller, a town the size of Woodstock may have their own little nuclear reactor that would provide all the electricity they need using their existing infrastructure. So I agree with Craig. I think I'll be surprised if anything gets called during veto session. This may wait for a longer conversation. Sure. Spring session.
So what do you see as the big topics during veto this last week? Anything that will come forward for a vote?
The only thing I really see that could come out of the woodwork, and that's the only thing I see coming out, might be a supplemental budget. There is so much demand, pressure on the state right now for financial assistance from the city regarding a whole variety of issues. I just cannot believe they'll want to wait till January to start the process of a supplemental budget to help with what's going on with the whole migrant issue. There appear to be a number of issues that the city is having with regards to how they're dealing with this situation. As I've always said, the tail kind of wags the dog when it comes to representation in Springfield coming out of the city of Chicago. But I just can't imagine a supplemental bill not coming out in the next few days, next week.
I think that's likely, but it's
even though they
certainly,
deny it.
right, it's certainly aggravated by the contracts that were given directly under the director of HFS, where 120 hours a week apparently is a normal work week at very extensive cost. And they continue to be stuck to the out-of-state employment services organization that was charging upwards of $400 an hour for security guards at the facility. So I think depending on how those stories play out, they're in a little bit of a difficult position. So.
And didn't I also read that the emergency services also had a contract employee that was billing huge amounts of money? I mean, in excess of
emergency management.
Yeah.
EMA, where you've lost 2 deputy directors and a contract employee that was very tied to the director. So yes.
Yes, please.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you for all this information. So the first question, when we talk about the migrant issue, And I know that we need immigration reform, but right now, the current situation is Texas and places are sending all of these immigrants to Chicago. So how do we deal, for lack of a better word, with Texas, with the states that are sending them to us? Is there a way that we can work with them and stop this? I know we have our own problems once they're here, but how do we prevent that from happening? What can we do?
So I think Illinois kind of earned it by declaring sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, so you kind of encouraged it from that perspective. And I would guess that from the southern state, not just Texas, the lack of a federal response over the past 3 years gave them no position but to take Chicago up on its sanctuary status. So until there's a federal response to this in general, the problem in Chicago compared to the problem at the southern border is still minuscule, but sure, it's going to be a challenge. We could go the New York route, where they're now doing free one-way tickets to wherever they want to go out of New York City, which negates the morality concern of the issue in general. It's a concern federally, and with what's going on in the world, I would support a work permit program where biometrics, fingerprints, and background checks were done, and immediate deportation for anyone that doesn't clear that. But I just don't see that coming out of the feds at this point.
Yeah, because it's not just Illinois that's getting them. I mean, Texas is sending them to a wide variety of states that have declared sanctuary.
I would just add a couple thoughts. I don't blame the Texas governor one bit. I don't know how anyone could have expected the state of Texas to absorb 100% of the immigrants coming over the border in Texas. No state would have had the ability on their own to be able to handle it. And to Craig's point on the sanctuary city issue, Illinois is only one of 2 states offering free health care. California is the other one, but California has been smart enough to implement managed care for limited services, mostly emergency oriented or significant health issues that people may be coming into this country with. It's like we put the sign up that said, if you have health issues, come to Illinois. And now we're in this $1 billion problem that frankly, we're all paying for. There's been, the governor has asked for help from the federal government to help the city of Chicago. Why isn't he asking the federal government to help the state of Illinois cover that $1 billion bill that we are all paying as residents of this state for health care? I mean, literally an undocumented immigrant, asylum seeker, can walk into the emergency room at Northwestern Hospital on Superior Street and get carte blanche care, and we all pay for it. No managed care, no limited services, no copay.
Can you, just insider stuff, can you kind of talk about the negotiations of that situation between the governor and the General Assembly? Didn't you ultimately push that decision about how to control the budget to the governor because the General Assembly, I gave you enough to know what I'm talking about, so now I'm going to softball it to
We're
you.
talking about the Medicare Omnibus Bill. In the Medicare Omnibus Bill that was passed at the end of session, the good news was that it increased some reimbursement rates for some of our existing providers in the state of Illinois taking care of Illinois residents. I mean, nursing homes comes to mind as probably being one of the biggest benefactors of that bill. But also contained in that Medicare Omnibus Bill was the authority that was given to the governor by the legislature to start implementing controls on how to get this $1 billion healthcare problem under control. And like I mentioned earlier, some of the things that they incorporated, they're talking about incorporating managed care, which would limit the amount of services, that would limit the costs that some healthcare agency would be able to charge for some of those services. The copay issue we talked about, they implemented it and then immediately rescinded it because they didn't know how to manage it. They're thinking it might come back January 1st and be put back in. I'm trying to think of what else was on that list. Those were the 2 big ones.
The one that didn't make it that I think probably is going to be a requirement is some level of vetting before
Yes.
anyone can go to the ER.
Right.
The number of calls, you can check with your dispatchers on the number of times calls are put out for something that's not an ER issue, but they end up at the ER anyways, is causing the hospital system significant concern.
And I remember asking the director of Medicare, Teresa Engelson, what is the list and what are the cuts that the rules the governor has implemented? And I don't have that list in front of me. I keep forgetting. Remind me to get that. She had the list laid out, and it looked like that list of constraints would have helped bring the number back down to the budget number of $550 million the governor had projected. But right out of the box, they've already blown half of that savings just in the co-op issue. So there's been nothing significant implemented that's going to help control any of those costs as of yet.
Yeah,
So
please,
one more
go
question.
right
So,
ahead.
there is I'm sure you know Ethan's Law that's in the Senate right now, or in a committee. And that's something that I support because it's just safe gun storage. And especially considering what happened in Maine and over the weekend, how many people have died during gun violence in various cities. I would like to know your opinion on safe gun storage, a safe gun storage law.
Is it Ethan's Law you said?
I think or is it Karina's?
It's Ethan's. So Ethan's Law states that if you have a child or a person in the house who's not allowed to have a gun,
Okay.
that you have to lock up your gun.
Oh,
It has
sure.
to be. And
you're liable if.
And yes, if that person accesses it, you're liable. I think right now the bill says a Class 2 felony.
So if we want to talk about parental liability for the acts of children, I'm probably on board, which means no matter what the kids are doing, we have to have some level of expectation. I think you will find that a majority of gun owners probably already take this into effect. But there are the stories every now and then of the kids picking something up. So whether there's a mandate on safe storage or a set of guidelines that expend to law enforcement on when charges can be done, and then to the courts on what is that expectation. But right now, under our court system, liability for the actions of others is pretty limited, right? We don't have that, you created that situation. I think that's likely to be a big discussion, given what's going on in the world right now, without a doubt, separate from the shootings, but just the general structure at Cornell or New York City, London, Beirut. Again, I mentioned even with my own fuel gas detector bill that I'm not exactly a government mandate kind of person. So it's not going to be a concept. It's actually going to be the execution of it that might cause me concern.
And just so you guys know, it's Senate Bill 1521 and Senator Ellman's carrying it, I believe.
Okay.
That's what I've got here.
No, okay, 1521 is correct.
I'm on board as well. I mean, anything that can be done at the home level, people need to be much more careful about how they store their weapons. Frankly, I think what's getting much more attention in Springfield the last couple of weeks anyway has been the expansion of red flag laws. Karina's bill,
Yeah, that's.
which would require a gun owner to turn over their weapons if in fact they are charged with a domestic violence charge, which I support. That's getting a lot more attention these days than that one. There have been gradual increases in legislation or enforcement for storage of guns over the years. I think this is just another layer that's being added, but the red flag law expansion, a lot of it makes an awful lot of sense to me. One of the one of the problems in Springfield is that when these big emotional gun bills get filed, and the assault weapon ban is probably a classic example. There's probably 20 or 30 different pieces of legislation that are all rolled into one big law, where a lot of those issues may make a lot of sense to a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle, particularly on the Republican side. But because they're contained with so many other nasty aspects of legislation that frankly we have issues with, there's no way to carve them out. They gave states attorneys red flag expansion in the assault weapons bill, or the Safety Act, excuse me, the Safety Act, where rather than a family member asking a judge to have someone's guns removed, a state's attorney could do it based on charges that might have been placed on someone. I could have easily supported that. But because it was contained in a bill that was going to make felons out of totally responsible, mindful, lawful gun owners, if they didn't register whatever type of weapon they have, that's a problem. And I'll see all the mail cards, you know, the next cycle because I didn't vote to ban assault weapons, or I didn't vote to expand red flag laws for states' attorneys, even though I supported it, so.
And the court case in the Highland Park shooter's father is going to be very enlightening and probably drive some additional language change potential.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members? Yes.
I just have one real
Yes,
quick thing. I
absolutely.
kicked myself if I
Please.
didn't mention PPRT
Oh, yeah.
and the diversion that local governments are going to be seeing. And just as we're going into spring session, that's something that I'm hopeful there won't be. I understand there was a clawback, for a better word, and we're hoping that's a one-time clawback, but we'll definitely be monitoring it for the future.
I just read about some of that. Local governments are going to take a big hit this
Yeah.
cycle over the weekend, so that's something I'm going to dig into.
Yeah.
Some way you have to pay for all those things that you're
Yeah.
not reducing.
Our Senate colleague Chapin Rose, who's kind of our budget guru, is suggesting that PPRT is what the governor used to balance the budget this year. He's going to sweep those funds with all of the additional expenses that we had.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to watch it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Shorten.
Just kind of going back to the energy issue, and I thank Member Soccer for bringing up HB 76. I think finding a way to improve small modular reactors on a long-term basis is really important. And frankly, the legislation that was passed included references to nuclear fusion, which is going to become a prominent form of energy in the next 15 to 30 years. We'll see. But an area of discussion that we've had a lot of controversy about at the county board level in the past year, 6 months, was 4122, which I know former Senator Chairman.
Just, yeah, whatever. Pam.
Here, Pam, spoke to the sponsors of, I think it was HB 4122, which passed, which referenced the solar farms and essentially took away zoning authority from the county, which, as I understand, was an approach to move towards those 2050 zero emissions goals. McHenry County, since 2018, had a pretty open policy on approving solar farms. As a matter of fact, at the point that law came into effect, we had approved close to 3,300 acres.
Oh, yeah.
And
Almost
since then,
3,500,
I don't
yeah.
even know what the number is. I'm trying to keep track, but it's lost on me at this point. I think the nuclear fusion and nuclear fission is the better long way to go if you're going to have zero emissions. And I'm concerned, and a lot of board members are concerned about the impact on our green spaces in the short term and the long term. So I understand that there was some sort of agreement with the Solar Association that there was going to be no trailer bills on this, but it's something that if there's an opportunity or a way to, maybe if we don't get our entire authority in that matter back, maybe some sort of limiter that says X percentage of agricultural land in the county is kind of the place that we're allowed to say no to these things. Because if you start to take a look at the amount of space that would be required just to power this county with solar and or wind, it's an absurd amount of land. We're talking anywhere between 25 and 50 square miles. So just, that's kind of my.
We're concerned about the decommissioning costs
Yeah.
in the event, and there's no ability for us to have any input into that.
100%. So the challenge with Illinois' movement to green is that it has an underlying presumption that we have plenty of land in America. And it's not an uncommon argument. The problem is we don't have an unlimited amount of land where the energy use is necessarily required, and that becomes a challenge. So if you take a look at a country like Germany, who far exceeds us in what they've done for green, but if you take a look, if you are growing hops, your solar panels are 30 feet off the ground and are angled in such a way so that the water requirement for those hops is required. They also put in place that you cannot do anything on prime agricultural land without the government's approval. In other words, they understand the protection. Now, they are a much smaller, more consolidated area, but that's a country that's had rain barrels off their roofs for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. So the reality is, in Illinois, we are not doing green well. We're just doing green quickly. And it comes at the expense of local control. It comes at the expense of eminent domain for private companies. The way we're implementing it is rather absurd in the goal of getting there quickly as opposed to getting there smartly. So definitely a concern. There are better ways of doing this. There was a legislative contingent that just went to Europe and learned a number of ways that where doing green can be done well and smart and in conjunction with all of those concerns. But yes, if you take a look at the energy need, whether it's any of the northern counties, the reality is the land space is not going to be within hearing. You certainly look at Chicago, and I think that was one of Senator Rose's comments on the floor, was that let's let Chicago do it first, right? Go ahead and manage your own energy use based on solar within your area. You would find that it would be a requirement on every rooftop, which is not necessarily a bad idea, but you can do it in a better way than, in my view, the way FEJA and CEJA have mandated it.
Well, ISACO has a committee that they've put together to kind of talk about how that legislation affected counties and where maybe we can go. So, and McHenry County has a seat at that. So we'll stay in touch with you and talk to you about, what ultimately transpires. So,
But
at least you're aware of what we're doing.
I think moving forward, it ought to be very indicative that the state has no problem thinking that controlling at the state level is the way that this legislature prefers to go. So prepare on what next is likely to follow that path.
How does, what's going on with House Bill 3445? And that's the Omnibus Energy Act, and that's the one that, the governor wasn't too thrilled about Ameren having,
The right of
Oh,
first
that's, I
refusal.
think that's gone.
And again, I don't mean to
That's
make a
dead.
political statement there, there's just a part of that bill that goes along with county control that does expand. And again, I just didn't know if that was gonna go, or how that was gonna.
The bill's not likely going to come up, but I think there's been articles saying Ameren isn't pushing it, but the reality was the bill was likely not getting called.
Okay.
Ameren's conceded that.
And I think the sponsor of the legislation just announced recently he's not moving it forward, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Another classic example of what Senator Wilcox mentioned. This was meant to facilitate additional transmission capability downstate. Ameren is the Commonwealth Edison of Southern Illinois. Basically, everything's, a lot of people may not be aware of that. Everything basically south of I-80 is Ameren territory. They were looking to add these additional transmission lines, ideally in an attempt to facilitate the transfer of other environmentally sensitive energy production into the state of Illinois by increasing our ability to bring it in from out of state. Ameren only wanted the right of first refusal to be able to build it.
Right.
The environmentalists didn't like that idea because they were afraid Ameren was gonna control it all. When you had IBEW and every major union in the state supporting the construction of these lines, they were all gonna get a piece of that production. They were all gonna get the work.
Plus, it's a known entity as opposed to a bunch of small ones that we have
course.
no idea what the viability is after
course.
year 2, year 3, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Right, so, I'm still waiting for the list from the director of the Illinois Environmental Council for the 10 megawatts of power, solar and wind power, wanting to come to Illinois to supplement the loss of coal-fired production that we're gonna see very quickly, much quicker than many people anticipate. I've asked her 3 times now, and I haven't gotten a list yet. I wonder where they are.
any other questions? I did want to note that Senator McConkey and Senator Severson did want to be here. Both of them had other commitments and couldn't be here, but I didn't want to indicate that obviously they had ignored us. They did respond, they just were unavailable. So thank you, the 2 of you, for taking your time and being here with us this morning. If there's anything we can help you with, please stay in touch. Obviously, as you know, we have both Shaylin and Alicia as the county's contact, so easier to find than any of us. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Moving on our agenda, and gentlemen, you are welcome to stay, but I don't think you're going to. Moving on, we really don't have anything under 7.1, but 7.2 is kind of an update on the liquor ordinance. Remember, we had a massive discussion about where we thought there were some shortfalls. Kyle Brewitt is in the audience from the State's Attorney's Office. We're going to ask him to come forward and take a seat and go over what has been put together. And then my understanding is that from Kathy that there's some input that you need from the committee as well.
Appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I don't know, Kyle, Justin, if you want to go through the ordinance and point out all of the changes and then go ahead and ask us for response and then input on any of those areas that you think you need guidance.
Being respectful for your time, I think I will say this. So there were some additional discussions that needed to happen with Mr. Canale and Norm and myself regarding the limitations. This is something that we've been discussing about the special use permits for like the 24-hour events really is where it's becoming an area of concern from my understanding is where we want to have maybe some limitations on what amount of alcohol can be distributed or sold in a particular transaction. My personal theory that I'll get into in a second, but they're going to have some higher up discussions about that. So there may be some of these that are subject to change a little bit, but I think I sent everything to Kathy on Friday, and I think she might have distributed everything else. But I can go through them.
Would you please just as a point of order? And if you'll remember what the circumstance was is that there were actually cases being sold as one sale to an individual. And it caused some, obviously, unanticipated consequences. And that's one of the reasons why there was a discussion of limiting what can be sold.
Sure, so I guess kind of going through them in order, page, I guess it would be 5. I don't have them exactly labeled, but I added 5.08.085. That is the requirement of liquor licenses in the county that have been given. So just take a step back. From my understanding, and I can't thank Kathy Bow enough, as everyone knows, Kathy's a rock star and she's been helping me out with kind of with all the procedure stuff. So Kathy has been an absolute rock star. But from my understanding, when individuals go to apply for a liquor license, regardless of the type of license, they get ours first, and then they have to get theirs from the state because the state won't let them get it without ours, and it's kind of chicken or the egg kind of analysis, right? So the requirements for licenses in 5.08.085 requires them to provide us with a copy of the state licensure, and then if they do not, they could be subject to the penalties as provided for in the Liquor Control Act, or excuse me, not the Liquor Control Act, in the Liquor Ordinance. Okay, I'll pause briefly, moving on. If anyone has any questions, we can kind of just go from there, just interrupt me. Classifications of license. So we, from my understanding, this is just a codification of the practice that Kathy and the Liquor Control Commission have already done, where individuals who either they're a brand new company or restaurant or whatever, getting the specific Class A and B licenses where they're going to be having a yearly license. When they're kind of late in the year, not having the benefit, obviously, with them just getting up and running, to have the full year's worth of license, so it kind of seems silly to charge them the full amount. So this is just a codification of that reflection, or past practice, I guess I should say, of reducing their rate slightly. So we've lowered it to $800 for those A's and B's when it's on or after December 5th of that particular year. Because everybody knows that on April 30th of the subsequent year is when we have all of our license renewals. So, still in that same section, so 5.08.090, specifically regarding those special use licenses that we were talking about. So I've added two different things here. The Class F license. Dram stop liability insurance, again, that's something that's been already being done as a requirement that they have to have dram stop liability insurance. I think that's just a fantastic practice, right? And it's in the Liquor Control Act anyway. Whether or not it was to the maximum limits, the statute really says to the maximum limits as one of the kind of underarching themes, right? But if ultimately you're going to have the limit, we can have a limit in there. I know I've seen some other liquor ordinances in other counties that have, dram shop liability insurance up to $300,000 or whatever the case may be. Or if we're just comfortable leaving it as dram shop liability insurance, that's certainly up for you folks to decide. Okay, so that's one of the things that may require just some small discussion. That obviously the good and the bad that you guys can probably already tell is dram shop liability insurance up to the maximum limits could be much more expensive, to such that they would disincentivize that particular event, or it could not be. I'm not necessarily an insurance.
Could there be a floor? Could we establish a floor that says that at least X amount?
That's what it would do. So have dram shop liability insurance up to a certain amount, because they're not going to sell policies that have a range, right? So they're going to have dram shop liability up to $300,000 or whatever. Is
that the standard in?
There is no standard from what I've seen. Okay. So I mean, realistically, it's just a matter of how you folks would like to have that implemented. It's also situation dependent, right? So I guess obviously the liability for selling alcohol at a particular event could be different in one situation versus another, and it could be continued completely internal. We don't have to have it within the liquor ordinance. That's not something that's absolutely required in my opinion. But I like to have it in there because even though it has been a past practice for us to have dram shop liability insurance as proof of it, and I think the state licensures require it anyway. Mm-hmm. We just don't want to make it, what I'm afraid of from a legal perspective is if you have dram shop liability insurance on a municipal level, a county level, and it turns out to be a different level than what the state requires. So that's why I just left it as dram shop liability insurance. If you want to have a number in there, great. This would be a kind of another theme you'll see in a second here. If you want to have a number, great. If you don't want to have a number, that's also great too. It could be completely internal.
Can we do something that says as per state requirements? And then if the state requirements change, we're in compliance? I mean, can we just do that?
We're in compliance anyway.
Okay.
So that would be my opinion, that less is more with this kind of stuff. When, as you know, probably above all people, less is more when it comes to legislation, right? You want to just legislate just enough to make sure that you have the incentivized conduct, or the legislated conduct, to be in lockstep with whatever you want, right?
So it's basically redundant to identify in compliance with state statute. You just leave it alone.
That would be my perspective.
Okay.
That would be my perspective. And again, if there's something that we want to have that's a little bit different, that we don't quite have a lot of information from, because what I also want to prevent with this is the Liquor Control Act provides for the county to have, through the Liquor Commission, to have control over the distribution and sale of liquor, right? So that's a lot and broad discretion when it comes to this kind of stuff, and what I don't want to have happen is we're now reverting back to the state statute every single time that it changes. So, again, kind of an underarching, from what I heard from the senators here, it seems to be kind of a regular theme anyway, right? But that would be just my 2 cents.
Brian, do you have any comment? I mean, being a liquor commissioner yourself in the past, do you have any?
Well, I was just going to say that I think that it is kind of standard practice to have a certain amount that's required. I know that some municipalities have it to $1 million. And, you know, that may seem to be excessive, but in today's marketplace, that's really not as excessive as we might think that it might be. But there is a differential frequently between A and B licenses versus single event licenses. So you wouldn't have the same onus of amount, if you will, for that.
Yeah, cost prohibitive to have an event. Maybe we can do a little bit of research and see how other collar counties specifically deal with that situation.
Sure, the problem is you can't have, the problem is as far as comparison for classification of license. I can tell you that Lake County is pretty similar with some. We're unique in some of ours. Kane County has double the list of what we have. So having the comparison is a little bit square peg round hole. I'm not trying to, and I want to be clear, whatever you folks would like to do, I can only provide my recommendation as to what you want to put in there. So please don't take this as me trying to push you one way or another. But as far as comparing other counties, it's a little bit difficult to do some of that because they might have different needs and different classifications of licenses. I know for a fact that they will have different classifications of licenses.
Even municipalities
Have huge
differences in classifications. You can't really compare them.
So I can tell you, like I had said, the state statute does require up to the maximum limit, right? And then we can kind of leave it on because they got to have that insurance liability coverage anyway for if it's specifically like an A or B license, they're getting insurance anyway, and they're going to be included in that, right? So
my own opinion is that we need to leave it as it is, basically, according to the state. But we can say, if we're asked, our level should be $1 million. That's my opinion. So it's more of a policy thing than it is rather than writing it into the ordinance.
I would agree, but I want to just make sure that we're covering everyone else. So somebody says that's a policy, it's not required. You can ignore a policy.
That's
You know, and my only concern is, again, the insurance for some of our special licenses, not so much people who have our typical, you know, retail operations, et cetera. I'm just concerned about the special events again and what type of liability we would maybe consider for something like that. But I think that's probably more discussion with the chairman as well, as he's the commissioner technically, so.
I just think that you can enforce the policy because you ultimately have the authority over the license.
To not give the license, right, I understood.
But that's something that I can look into as to other similar special uses, because I mean, it is a special use permit under the state statute. So maybe some other counties might have a specified amount or not. That's something that I can certainly look into.
Yeah, and I would talk to the chairman about that and his comfort level, maybe stating an amount. Maybe that's another way that we can ensure those special events are definitely run appropriately. Thanks.
Of course, and also within that same section, and you'll see again in, I believe in Class S licenses, it was always my position that the conditions of sale of alcohol that can be distributed or sold in a particular transaction could have been a restriction that could be imposed at the outset, but we made it clear, a lot more clear with the addition. So conditions may include, but are not necessarily limited to, the amount of alcoholic liquor, which is defined earlier in our ordinance, that is allowed to be transferred, distributed, offered for sale, or sold to an authorized patron, meaning not somebody underage, or consumer in a single transaction or interaction. So again, this was where I had explained it from my personal position. Again, this is something that is just my recommendation as of right now, without speaking to Mr. Keneally as well as Mr. Vinton. But my theory was not to over-knead the dough. Essentially, if you try to legislate something to the extent that it's so specific that it could be considered that the exclusion of anything else that you didn't think of could be considered as permitted. That's what I didn't want to have happen. So that's why having conditions within the discretion of the commission and the commissioner would be something that you folks could implement and really sink your teeth into as to how you want to create that. Because what I didn't want to have happen was, just off the top of my head, have a really high alcohol content and have the limit be 48 ounces in a particular transaction, which is, I mean, that's 48 ounces of high alcohol, like beer, for example. I mean, you might run into the same problems as a bottle of, I don't know, Malibu, right? So, I mean, trying to not, like I said, overknead the dough. So that's why I have those same clarification additions to the F and the S. Bless you. And same with the dram shop liability insurance as well, in the Class S license. Class M added dram shop liability insurance also. Those are the agritourism licenses, same conditions language as well. And moving on to the BYOB establishments. So this was something that, from my understanding, was added last year. And unfortunately, I wasn't involved in those discussions, but we don't have a corkage license from what Kathy Bao had indicated to me. So if someone had come up and said, hey, can I have a corkage license because I want to open up a BYOB restaurant, that's not something that we would have been able to accommodate. After some short discussions, because I did meet with Kathy as well as the chairman, as well as Pete, at one of our last, I believe just last week, right? Yep, thank you. See, the days all run together. Thank you, Pete. This was something that maybe we wanted to explore implementing, but up to the commission on whether or not we just want to take it out, leave it in. Still have the same requirements, so it's just a matter of an option play.
I think it's important to have something like this because the municipalities have it. Why wouldn't we do it? We'd be giving the onus to they would just move into the municipality territory if we didn't do it.
I like it. I think it's, we keep getting more requests for those types of opportunities, and I think that it is good to have it identified within the ordinance, and I also agree that there should be some onus or responsibility regarding VASA training, et cetera. So I like it. I think it's good.
Me too. I'd rather have it clearly
Most municipalities have
stated.
included.
Peter, did you?
It hasn't been used, and it's sat there. It doesn't strike me personally as the type of dining environment that's likely to be in the unincorporated part of the county, and that's why it hasn't really developed. We certainly, if that restaurant wanted to come into the unincorporated part of the county and wanted to do this, I think we could certainly react and put it back in. We were just like, it's sitting there and it's unwieldy the way it is, so.
You think it's unwieldy the way it's written?
Well, we don't have, to take it out is easy.
Right, but
If we're gonna leave it in, we gotta fix it.
Okay, then, I mean, I would prefer to fix it and have people look and say the opportunity exists, as opposed to saying it's not in there, maybe I'll go someplace else, or have to come forward and ask. So I'd rather have it in. I mean, that's just a personal perspective.
Why is it unwieldy as it is?
Kyle, Kathy?
Is it hard for you to?
No, so we've never had anybody question about a restaurant having a BYOB. We've had one-day licenses or like venues question about doing that, which we don't offer. So this would be more for restaurants, for when it needs to be more clear that it is for a restaurant, not a one-day event. Also, it says to have this, you must obtain a corkage license. Well, if you look up in our ordinance, nowhere does it say that we have a corkage license. So we need to establish a corkage license, what letter that would be, and how much that would cost as well.
See, I personally, as kind of, a snob, when it comes to some things, I sometimes like to bring my own bottle of wine into an establishment as opposed to ordering off the limited availability of my favorite local restaurant. So, again, maybe people would take maybe restaurants would do that more if their clientele understood they could do that. My comment would be is I'd leave it in. But that's my personal
I
perspective.
do think that section I just needs to be removed. I think that's, I don't think you have to have a corkage license. You already have a permit as a BYOB.
And we're McHenry County, not New York City. Or Chicago.
And it refers to that in the first paragraph too, a corkage license.
That probably would be easier
Without it,
to
it might
implement
close.
too, right?
So you
Just
wanna
not to
call
have
it a permit, not a license?
Right,
That means we still have to establish like.
because the state doesn't have a BYOB license.
Right.
Classification. So we would have to have a permit category. That's the way most,
And would that be a 1 year renewing with the rest again?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
but it's,
like an appendage,
but that's the way municipalities get around it. They just don't call it a license, they call it.
a permit. Can we investigate that? You know,
It's
run
already-
it by our state's attorney, by Patrick, and also our liquor commissioner, and see if, so this recommendations from us to them.
Chairman Bueller did not have a strong opinion on this one or the other, so if you guys want to put it back in.
Well, I would agree with Brian. I mean, it's easier to call a permit, get rid of I. And then that's easier for you to administer too. There's not a whole lot of,
It to me would be the same as a regular full-blown license, so would you charge the same amount for it then, $1,500 renewable every year?
no, I would be,
Most, yeah. I don't think, most municipalities that I've had
charge anything.
conversation, we have a minimal amount, like $50.
$50 a year?
Yeah.
It's an amenity. It's a service you're providing your clientele. Yeah. And again, we've already said nobody's really asked, but
You have to rewrite the introductory paragraph though, because it does talk about a license there, a corkage license. Just change the wording.
But what about insurance? So let's say something happens because the servers will be corking and uncorking the wine bottles or whatever they have. So what is the liability to the restaurant?
I would say, I'm not an attorney, Kyle, but I would say no more than it is opening up their own
I'm just,
bottles. Yeah, no, it's good, it's a good question.
Again, to the extent that I know, which is very little as it relates to liability, but I would have, if I were a plaintiff's attorney, I would have no problem identifying that as a dram shop if they're corking alcohol for individuals, right? So I would imagine that it would be similar to the sale of alcohol from the establishment itself. But I think more so it would be a premises liability issue that we don't ever really deal with, right? I mean, even though dram shop and premises liability can be construed as kind of the same thing, with the dram shop obviously being the extension of the premises liability coverage, probably no more so than it otherwise would be in our other circumstances. So we could have similar dram shop liability insurance as well.
I do think that we probably should add an insurance portion under that section. I think that should be included.
Of course.
just the verbiage that's maybe in
Yeah.
one of the other licenses.
Exactly. So I think that would be beneficial. This is a tough one because frankly, a lot of the BYOB places, they go back and forth. They'll get a BYOB permit and then they don't like that and then they want to go to a regular license. And then they decide, well, the types of things that we do, we're not getting enough, to make that worthwhile. And so then they go back to BYOB. And so we've had a couple of establishments that change almost every other year. They change back and forth in Woodstock. And so I do think it's an opportunity. It may never be used, but it's an opportunity. I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as Kathy she's the one that's dealing with all the questions, as long as she feels comfortable with understanding what it is.
No, absolutely. I didn't feel comfortable with the way it was. We never really had anything to fit it into, but with this discussion, I do.
And I just think it's clearer to people who might be
Yeah.
interested that we're open, so that's my perspective.
We want to still have them go through the same procedures for a new licensee for an ARP? Fingerprinting, interview?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. Okay.
cover ourselves.
And we want to identify it as a corkage permit in the definitions for classifications? Or do you want to have a fancy new licensure? No? You don't want to call it the X license? No. There's no reason this can't be fun.
Or just, just, yeah,
Right.
or just bring your own, I don't know.
Right.
We'll leave that in your hands, and you can come up with.
You got it. You got it. Okay.
We could call it the Justin clause.
Yeah, right. Anything else that everyone sees with the implementation of the BYOB corkage permit?
Nope.
And, okay, so moving on to 5.08.100, so issuance of licenses, if you go all the way down to 15, 15C specifically. The way that the language read before was if an applicant reports a felony, so this is on the issuance of an applicant for a license. If they report a felony conviction under A10 as they're required to, such conviction may be considered by the commissioner in determining qualifications for licensing, but the way that the language was before, but shall not be a bar to issuing a license. That's not entirely true. If obviously they were convicted of a felony that had to do with the Liquor Control Act, that would be an outright bar. So what I did was I had the language reflect a little bit more in 5.08.120 as the liquor commissioner taking into consideration the timing from the conviction, rehabilitation, a little bit more of a factorial analysis rather than an outright straight yes or a straight no, which I think is, from what I understand, and I could be wrong, but just a suggestion that instead of an outright bar, we still want to have, we recognize that people, depending on what kind of felony conviction it could be, may have been rehabilitated enough to make the liquor commission comfortable with issuing them a license. If that's not something, if I totally misread that, please just let me know and I can remove that completely, but.
Not from my perspective, but I look at my members.
I think it's a good change.
Okay.
It's good to know another attorney feels that way.
And again, that factorial analysis is really in 5.08.120A4 is really where you're going to see that language, and it just makes it consistent. But moving down into point 120 even further, we obviously with the Safety Act, we don't have conditions of bond anymore, so I just changed it to I added pretrial release.
Good catch.
Yeah, that's a good catch. I
Excellent
would
catch.
have missed that.
It's a habit. And then I added 5.08.125, termination. So this is some language that I wanted to float out because I know that we've had some concerns from before about what happens if someone who was originally eligible to receive a license no longer becomes eligible if they were to apply that day. And this is the paragraph that I've added.
And I, as always, defer to Kathy as she's actually the one who handles all of it and is much more familiar.
Sure.
And I think she's comfortable with this language, so.
Sure, and instead of making any a little bit of a gray area, so whether or not we could have done that before, I was of the position that we could have still, but again, this makes it more much more clear. And any questions about that? Okay, moving on. 5.08.160, I added paragraph G, and these are for, well, I guess now we can add BYOB licenses or corpus licenses as well. I can add that. Excuse me just 1 second while I write that down so I don't forget. Poor Kathy had a hard time with people who were not following her direction and taking advantage of her generosity and submitting all of the application and all the information all at once, really close to that April 30th deadline, and that's not fair. Without at least some sort of consideration to Kathy's time, the county's time, because it really is just Kathy processing all these. So instead of having what we identify as a late fee or a late penalty, it is my opinion, it's within the liquor commissioner's discretion to set the licensing fee. So without getting into whether or not a late fee or a late fine or whatever, however you want to call it, a penalty of some kind imposed, I was just going to suggest the escalation in relation to the cutoff date of what the licensing fee is going to be. Not identifying it as a fine, not identifying it as a fee, just what the cost of the license period. So cost of the license up to, and we put forth some suggested dates. Again, all of this was discussed with the chairman as well as Pete and Kathy. It's all a matter of just the amount. So Chairman Bueller had an idea of making it a percentage. That is fine if you want to make it a percentage, so that if you wanted to increase on a given year what the $1,500 license fee base would be, that would be fine. We're just going to run into some confusion as to some people with, what are we actually going off of if you have like the double late,
Yeah,
the
right. It's 3%,
the double
6%,
late
yeah, right.
submission, right? So is it 10% or 15% of the original 1,500, or is it 10% or 50% of the next one in the middle, right? But either way, that's something that we can fix really easily. So I found that would probably be a little bit easier than identifying what a fee or a fine might look like, because there was nothing that I could find that necessarily prohibited it, but also that didn't really permit it either.
I love it. And you'll put that plainly displayed on the directions when people are reapplying for their license, so that they understand that if they get it in late, you're not gonna be calling them 3 days, ahead of the drop dead date, because now we have a policy in place and it just is what it is, but they know that up front on the directions.
Yes, and so they actually won't even have the option to pay less. So we are implementing the new software, which I'm very excited about, and we're hoping to have it implemented by February 1st, but we're not being promised. And this software will also speak with the health department and the planning and zoning department. So instead of us mailing out these big, thick packets and costing the county all of that money every year, the applicants and the renewals will receive a letter. They will need to create a login into the county's portal. They will submit all of their paperwork into there. Everything will get compiled. If it needs planning review, we send the workflow to planning. If it needs health review, we send it to the health department. Once everything is completely submitted and all ready to go, I'll check it all for accuracy, making sure everything is correct. And then once it's correct, they'll be able to print their license right there. Unless it's a new applicant, they need to interview with you. That would be different. But for renewals, they'll be able, and raffle licenses and one-day licenses, they'll be able to print it right there. Also, the software allows us different jobs. So we won't even have to, because in the past, we always said to submit your renewals by April 15th, and it was completely ignored. And so now what the software will actually do is it'll open up on February 1st through April 1st as a job, and it will charge them $1,500 unless they have the add-on of the patio. And then come April 1st, that actually closes down and it opens up and it charges them more. It just automatically does that. And then on April 14th, that closes down. April 15th, it charges them an even higher one. So it takes it all completely out of our hands and puts it all on the software and on that.
Perfect. If that doesn't happen in time, you're also prepared, though, to ensure that everybody understands that we're not going to babysit that come that deadline. It's just going to be an automatic
It's going to take some
additional cost.
Some stern hand holding, because we still have people who come in and they want you to sit down even after 15 years and walk them through the license renewal, and it just needs to be, this will be so much nicer. Everything will be legible. And
how long have you waited for this?
5 years.
Just letting everybody know. Okay.
So I think it's brilliant, that's the way it needs to be. They need to be charged a fee if they're after April 15th, absolutely, because I know what that last minute rush can be and everybody goes skiddy-boo on it, so I get all of that. But what's into this paragraph then? What are we trying to do? Because I don't know that we can get all the language into this one paragraph G, can we, that we need?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the classification of licenses with the exception of the corkage license.
Right.
And it's already identified.
Which we're not calling a license anymore, right?
We're calling it a
Right,
permit,
permit.
that's right, thank you, yes. We're calling, or we're just gonna call it X, right? So we have all the classification of permits or licenses. The cost of those licenses are going to be $1,500, or with the exception of the corkage permit. They're going to be $1,500 from prior to April 1st. And we've identified that because you have to look into each classification of license to get the amount that you're gonna pay. Each of them are gonna be $1,500. And then what it does is paragraph G expands that to the 1st to the 14th, it's gonna be a higher amount than the original 1,500. Whatever it's percentage or amount, whatever you folks want. And then from 15th, after April 15th, on or after, then it'll be a different amount. So it's really not a matter of placing it in each classification, it's a matter of just plugging it into just
Right.
And
this
that's
one
why-
paragraph.
And because the cost of each of the licenses isn't the same, that's why Chairman Bueller suggested, the liquor commissioner suggested a percentage of whatever
Right,
that
so
cost was.
So are we looking at then 10% from April 1 to the 14th and then 50% of that original license fee? After that?
I think that's what we're discussing. What's your thought process? And we'll present that as,
All of our fees are $1,500, right?
Unless you have a patio add-on, it's an additional 100.
Okay, but I mean, like, it doesn't matter what classification is, basically.
For
Is-
renewals, it's just A and Bs, and they're both 1,500.
Okay.
Yeah. This is just for the renewals.
Yeah.
Right.
This is like a piece of cake in a way.
It-
Because
yeah.
there's a lot of other places that have like buku different licenses that all have different fees and that's, I think, but I think it's brilliant that we finally have that all automated. I think, this is just personal opinion, but I think we should charge them if they're from April 1st to through April 14th, it should be 10% of that original fee. And then if it's beyond that, I would hit them hard.
Yeah, see, I feel that way
really-
too.
I hate to be
I
that
don't know what
way,
hard is, but
but I would hit them hard at 50%.
That's what I had suggested also, because if it's really low, then they're like, it's just an extra $100.
Right.
I'll get it in later.
Yeah.
it should be onerous.
15th after, I think it's the original fee plus 50%. It's,
Do we know what the calculation would be though for what a brand new licensure would be? Because the remedy for that is not necessarily, it's a denial of the renewal, but they can always reapply as if they were the first time of application, right?
So you're saying if they don't make that deadline at all?
Right, so like, well, how would you treat somebody who didn't get their license renewal in on time, right? Like the remedy would be to deny them the license, and what they're getting from a renewal that they don't get from an original is the additional $1,000, I think, right? To not have to go back to fingerprint and interview, right?
Yeah, the 1,000, if they didn't get it in on time, they would have to start completely fresh, and there's additional paperwork,
Yeah.
documentation they have to turn in. They would have to pay another $1,000 application fee, get re-fingerprinted again, and come and interview before all of you guys.
And it's
again.
the delay.
So, right.
Right, they
Right.
can't serve
Well, it's
alcohol,
exactly, they
right,
can't serve
it's,
alcohol.
yeah,
So-
that's bad.
So 25, is it $2,500 all in for notwithstanding whatever extra expenses they have for the state licensure stuff?
Correct, unless they have a patio, that's additional $100, but it would be the $1,000 and the $1,500 and the time to get fingerprinted and.
The loss of revenue and not being able to sell alcohol.
And you would be surprised on how many applications we get the night before.
oh yeah.
And ironically, I think if the math's even closer, getting maybe what, a $250 discount from a brand new license if you're that late, I think that's hilariously ironic, which would be good.
So are you comfortable with the suggestion of 10% and 50%? I'm agnostic, I don't care.
I mean, I think so. I think that 10% would be 150.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of marginal, but.
Well, it's telling you didn't make the deadline, but you
Yeah.
still have till the 14th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the 50% I'm comfortable with. 'Cause
As long as we said 50% of the original fee, so we
Original,
can make
yep.
sure we're clear.
Right.
All right, okay,
The original license fee.
got that, Kyle?
Yeah, of course, yep.
Eric? Good.
Have we ever, like, given them the opportunity for a split fee payment? Is that anything we want to consider?
I'm a no.
Like a partial payment?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
a big no.
Nobody's even question for.
You,
Because I know that some municipalities, including Woodstock, we did 50% at the time of renewal, and then 50% by November 1st. And if you don't do it by November 1st, then there's a fine that goes along with that. But
I think that's
It's
just
just a
more
question.
administrative, I know, but I think that's more administrative and again, additional software that we have to keep up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go backwards, just upfront.
we started, when it was kind of tough for
Yeah.
for folks, but at the same time, I don't disagree. I don't know if it's necessary, but just a question.
And again, I'm not pounding my foot.
Yeah, you are. You really are, but that's okay.
No, I just, planted it firmly with a pounding. So is that okay that we still just leave it all up front and get the revenues and move forward? Yeah, and it's easier, that's what I'm saying.
It is easier.
From an administrative perspective, I don't want her to have to track it, so
The
just,
only
we leave
thing
it.
is, if the software is not up and running in time, it might be hard to implement this as easy as if the software's running. They said we're gonna be cutting it close, so
Well, we'll see what we can,
we're hoping.
okay, we're good. That's it, then, yep.
Yeah, everything else that you have that has some, I think the track changes I added are left on there in blue, were just either grammatical or anything else. So, anything else that I did not address that you would like me to address?
The members of the commission, of the liquor commission,
I did change that number from 8 to 7.
and we did that because,
It's not eight.
Because it's not
27 of
8.
us on the
Oh.
committee.
Yeah, it changed, that's what.
but, duh. Okay.
That's okay. It's-
The only thing I was thinking about that I was trying to think back, I thought it was an odd error, and I was wondering if she was including Chairman Bueller in that 8 of the Liquor Commission.
But he's not a member, he is the commissioner. I don't know.
That was just my thought process. and
Could be.
Maybe that's why it was an 8, because I thought it was an odd error.
Clarify that for us, would you? Yeah, just to make sure that we're not doing anything. Otherwise, I think we're done with that discussion. Thank you very much for your efforts on this. Really, I mean, seriously, really appreciate it. Particularly those of us who did this for 2 years previously.
This is an ordinance that we'd like to put on review for the November County Board and action for December. So we would need a motion in a second to move forward with the additions of Mr. Kealy and today's.
Are you all comfortable enough with the recommendations we made and potentially having some feedback, again, from the state's attorney's office that might not be able to incorporate some of these or might be a little bit different? I'm okay.
Solid.
Yeah, okay, can I have a motion then to place this, Mr. Shorten, seconded by Mr. Sager? Can we have a roll call, Kath, sorry, or do you want me to quick do it?
Hendricks,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Sager,
Yes.
Shorten,
Yes.
Altough.
Yes. Okay, we have no presentations, we have no old business, we have no reports, we have no executive session. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Yes, from Ms. Wagner and seconded by Mr. Hendricks.